Welcome to Cody in the Cinema. Today we're discussing North by Northwest, the 1959 Alfred Hitchcock classic starring Cary Grant and Ava Marie Saint, and this movie is my favorite Hitchcock alongside of maybe Psycho. I have loved this movie since the first time I saw it. If you're familiar with the ending, of course, Mount Rushmore in South Dakota being such a big part of that ending. I had just come back from a road trip to South Dakota, and then about a week after that, I see this movie for the first time, and what an experience that was. This did get a 4K release, and so recently, and so I thought, why not do a film analysis of it? And I've tried to, I've seen so many of these pictures over the years, and I've tried to pin down, why is it that I like North by Northwest more than all of his movies by a considerable margin? And I think it's because it is the expression of Hitchcock's greatest strength, in my opinion, which is to create a thoughtful, solid piece of entertainment. And there isn't that much filmmaking out there like it. He has his own unique signature, and I think a lot of why this film works so well is because of Cary Grant. And as I was watching the film again to create this analysis, I began to realize just how important that casting was and just how magnificent of a presence this character had on screen. So if you look at the plot and everything it's trying to do and all the pieces it's trying to tie in and all of these spy elements, it occurs to you that Cary Grant actually is doing so many tasks at the same time that without him doing all of these things at once, the picture fails. So for example, what happens if Cary Grant isn't charismatic? Well, then you have a long-winded 2 hours and 16 minutes of, pretentious nothingness. What if it's not funny? What if he's not funny? Well, then the product's kind of stiff. It's kind of full of itself. What if he doesn't have a toughness to him? What if he can't deliver the punches literally in the movie, so to speak? Well, then the credibility falls apart, especially as the plot goes along, because he doesn't have the actual physical prowess to carry three parts of the plot. And what if he isn't resourceful? Well, then, for the plot to work, things have to become much more contrived. And so because Cary Grant has to do all of these things at the same time, it makes for a very difficult acting job that he pulls off effortlessly. And when we think about the greatest performances in cinema history, I think it's really easy to point to, a Brando or a Daniel Day-Lewis. But what Cary Grant does here is sometimes so subtle that you don't even notice how talented he actually is. I wanted to compare this performance to something like John Hamm from Mad Men, which is difficult not to, right? You have two men on the top of their game as these ad executives in New York. In Mad Men, the TV show, let's say you would not have had that magnificent, career-defining, all-time great performance from John Hamm as Don Draper. I think Mad Men would have been able to have been a great show without Don Draper, as played by John Hamm, because of all the other great supporting actors and because of how well constructed the plot was and the social commentary. But John Hamm really just took it even to another level. The ad executive here in this movie, played by Cary Grant, is a little different. The entire plot follows this character. And so if Cary Grant does not pull this off, everything falls apart in the picture. And I would imagine that in the hands of a lesser director, this would have turned into a real dud as a result of that. So that performance is mostly why I think this movie works. All right. And we think about what is a moment in this film where all of these things are blended together? I'll give you an example. So early on, Grant smoothly sort of pushes one guy out of the way, convinces him with the quickest tongue ever to allow this other woman to get in the taxi. And it's humorous, it's effective, it shows his confidence, his resourcefulness, and he's in the taxi, and now we're on a chase scene. Not a chase, but not a chase, but they're going to the next piece of action. And how do we even establish this sense of suspense? and action and frantic pace at which the picture's got to go. Of course, in the very beginning, from that great direction of Alfred Hitchcock. And one of the best opening credit scenes I've seen in a movie. You have the New York skyscraper with all the sort of mirror effect of seeing the cars below as the credits roll by. It establishes how fast the city moves, how easy it is to get lost in the city or to get kidnapped, how information can slip by in a New York minute. That is the kind of directing Hitchcock is so good at. And it works well with Cary Grant's performance. There is a shot that happens shortly after Cary Grant's kidnapped that I'd never noticed until my last viewing, that I wanted to just point out here to you. When he is escorted into the room where he's forced to drink alcohol, which eventually gets him drunk, and there's the thing with the car, one of the first things he notices, he comes into the frame and then he sees the bookcase and he says, "Don't worry, I'll catch up on my reading." Instantly, we're taken into this interesting scenario in which this character is obviously going to be overwhelmed by the number of tasks that face him in a world that's smart and witty and funny and interesting. And later, when he comes back to try to prove that he wasn't off his rocker, what happens when he goes to where the liquor was before? It doesn't contain booze anymore. It's just books. I think a lesser director would have had Cary Grant tied up and kicked around and thrown into a dingy room, and then there's no intrigue, you know? Whereas when you throw him into a library like this, there's something a little bit more inherently interesting, and it makes you feel a little bit smart watching it. And that is something that I noticed that I really, really liked. I think one of the reasons why Cary Grant's performance remains so universally captivating and has stood up so well over the years, held up so well, is because of how believable and everyman that drunk conflict actually is. Now, you and I may not be 3 martini lunchers at a fine dining establishment in Manhattan, but you and I, or someone we know, or someone we're going to know, or someone we've heard about has been on a bender, they've had a crazy night, and the next day or the next few days they're trying to put their life back together and figure out what happened. And because the inciting event kind of happens around that circumstance, it normalizes and brings this conflict into a place that we can all understand it and appreciate it. Now, something else that I noticed throughout this picture, it's fun to be a spy in this movie. When Cary Grant is like trying to blend in and he's, he's being maybe hassled about being wanted and so forth for like a crime he didn't commit, what does he do? He sees his picture, and what does he do? He sees the picture that he's an outlaw, he puts on sunglasses. It's like a little kid, when you're a little kid playing spy, what are some childish things you might do just to have fun? What is our dream of being a James Bond-like figure? We want to drive a cool car. There are plenty of cool cars in here. Let's talk a little bit about Eva Marie Saint. When they finally sit down together and the actions finally does slow down for the first time ever, it's really when those two sit down together for dinner on the train. That spot could, in a lesser movie, have had all the tension dissolve and it could have been a boring romance from there. Instead, what happens is he meets Eva Marie Saint, played terrifically in that role, and she's almost more aggressive than he is in pursuing him for spy reasons, but also for attraction reasons. And we are immediately as enthralled with their relationship as we were with all the other spy and intrigue and why did I get kidnapped and all that stuff. And that charisma from both of those actors together and their inherent chemistry on screen makes that part of the movie as interesting as all the other outlandish stuff happening. We don't get bored. Again, it's part of the illusion that Hitchcock creates of what it would be like to be a spy of sorts going across the country. I know I'm using that term loosely, but that's a little bit of what I think it's supposed to feel like. And to speak to that, if you have ever driven across the country, as I have many times, and you've gone from somewhere like Tennessee, Virginia, maybe you've gone a little bit north of that, you may have crossed through Indiana to go to South Dakota. And I think that's brilliant that there's the whole scene where nothing interesting at all is happening in Indiana. And all of a sudden a plane comes and makes that boring part of the road trip interesting, because in some ways this is a great road trip movie. In fact, this shares similarities to Dumb and Dumber, right? Wrong place, wrong time. And I've always liked that about this picture. And I love the Black Hills and I love South Dakota. And it's interesting how, I've talked about the fantasy of this picture, Hitchcock manages to even make Mount Rushmore kind of a fantasy, making more of that monument than what is really there. Because there were certain specific rules that he had to follow when filming, and even when using the recreation of Mount Rushmore. And he kind of danced around those a little bit. It's sort of interesting to read the history behind that piece of it. But in reality, there isn't a mansion that gets to sit right beside of the four presidents, right? There's not going to be two people hanging off of like a part of the face on that monument. That is all more stuff added in there to get you invested in the fantasy, and it works. And of course, that ending, if you watch the beginning I said, has these cars rushing quickly across these like mirrors on these skyscrapers. And at the end, you have that famous scene with the innuendo with the train. It's such a tightly packaged 2-hour, 15, 16, 17-minute movie. A few other shots I liked. Cary Grant walks into the UN building, and it's like just this shot where he's like tiny, like a little ant. And when he leaves, he's literally, if you go back and watch that scene, which I'm sure looks great in the 4K, you can actually, like when he's getting chased out, you'll see him in the literal north by northwest part of the frame, exiting the building again, kind of as a tiny piece of a bigger puzzle. And there are so many little moments like that in the film that create the fantasy. They make it fun, they make it exciting, and they make a random guy in a suit have such a captivating life that we want to be a part of. And I love it for that reason. The only criticism I've ever had of this movie is because of how much I love the Black Hills in South Dakota, I feel like Hitchcock could have even done more with that. There are plenty of different geographic awesome places. Like, I don't know that he could have gone to the Badlands and filmed. That's my favorite national park, but there are other, just so many opportunities there that I wish he could have worked in just a little bit more of that natural part of South Dakota. But nonetheless, this is one of the premier road trip, going across the country, spy movies. The twist work in it, the fact that Eva Marie Saint goes through so many different character arcs in such a short amount of time, her captivating performance. I think this is pretty easily one of Hitchcock's best films, one of his most fun, and honestly one of the best acted with the best characters. So those are my thoughts on the picture. If you have any you'd like to share, that does help grow the channel in the form of comments. Hitting the like button really does help me out if you want to do that, if you did enjoy the content. And if you have not subscribed, love having, getting a subscriber always feels really good on my end. Like hearing from you all. Thanks for participating, and we'll see you next time on Cody in the Cinema.